Redditors who worked at defunct stores, Blockbuster, Circuit City, etc., when did you realize they were done for? Former CompUSA employee. The speed at which they started changing the slogan increased. They introduced and rescinded a reward/loyalty program inside of 6 months, and they started pushing bait and switch selling tactics in our monthly store meetings. I handed in my resignation the day before they announced the company closing. Walden Books. When one of 2 registers caught fire, the fire department put it out, but rather than pay to haul it away, the company left it, a hulk of melted plastic, where it was at the checkout. The store closed 2 weeks later. Worked at a Hollywood video. When there was a solid week with less than 10 customers, I knew it wasn't going to last. Luckily it was just my job for while I was in college. I worked at Blockbuster. I was there when they started Blockbuster Total Access to compete with Netflix. You add movies to your account, they mail the DVDs to you. You can return the DVDs to any Blockbuster. As soon as they scan them in, you'll get the next movies on your list sent out, so you didn't have to wait as long for turnaround. Even better, you were able to rent a movie at the Blockbuster for free that you turned it in at. It was actually a great service. You could get tons of movies, and it was really easy to get people interested in signing up for it. Foot traffic in stores increases, the amount of candy and snacks we sold increased. We even had an uptick in paid movie rentals for non-new releases, cause parents would exchange their movie for a new release and get a couple for the kids as well. Then they started to change it. Restricted the amount of movies you can exchange each month. Different plans had different restrictions on what movies you could get, how many new releases, etc. It became really difficult to explain to customers because there were so many restrictions in place. After a bit you couldn't exchange a movie in store at all. Foot traffic died again, and the chain along with it. I worked at Babies R Us for 3 years. For part-timers, our hours would fluctuate based on sales from the previous weeks. If we had a bad week, as much as 75% of us would get called off future shifts. It was so random. I could have 10 hours one week and 34 hours the next. It felt like the employees were not the only ones living paycheck to paycheck. Worked at Best Buy for a while, got fired, and then went to work at Circuit City. I knew it the second I walked into that store. 6 months later we were told it was closing. Best Buy constantly updated fixtures and layouts/designs. Everything was bright and new. I imagine that Circuit City looked exactly like it did when it first opened. I worked for Borders from 2000 to 2008. When I was laid off, I was working what had originally been 3 job descriptions. They decided to eliminate that position too and dump all the work on my already overworked boss. Called it restructuring and other corporate weasel words, but I could see the ship was sinking. Still miss that place. I worked in the warehouse at Sears in college until 2007 when I graduated. We were regularly running out of inventory and everything seemed like it had to be ordered in on a case-by-case basis. I was the person in the back that loaded the toolboxes, treadmills, snowblowers, etc. into vehicles. When you're running out constantly of your top revenue-generating pieces, something isn't right. Also, they didn't even bother updating inventory. I had a friend there that walked off with a couple of big screens and nobody ever even noticed. I worked at Lone Star Steakhouse. There's not too many of them left anymore, if any. I worked an open to close shift one night, by myself. Had 2 tables and made $12. I started a career elsewhere shortly after that, and 6 days after I left Lone Star for the new position, the restaurant closed. The employees weren't told either. They showed up and the place was shut down by corporate already. Edit, did some follow-up research. Last one in the US closed in October 2019. Still one running apparently in Guam of all places. Guess I'll have to plan a visit, get me a Texas Rose. Second edit, the Lone Star Grill franchise in Canada is not the same as Lone Star Steakhouse in America. Just found that out. I worked for a national camera store that went into administration. I was on my day off and found out via watching the news. Spent the rest of my day off job hunting. I worked for a Kmart in the early 2000s when the chain was starting to die a long, slow death. This location was a total shit show. The store itself was dirty, in an unrenovated and outdated sort of way. My first day of death, I saw a bulletin about how a secret shopper had asked an associate for help and he told her to F off. Training was a joke, and it was super easy to swap up so goods could be purchased for other prices, as long as the prices weren't too high, not that the dullard cashiers would have noticed. By far the worst area in the store was the warehouse. There was never enough item stock when there was a blue light sale, and customers got pissed, but other than that, items were incredibly overstocked because Kmart didn't give a shit. There were huge boxes blocking the warehouse aisles, so I literally had to climb over piles of haphazardly stacked stuff. I quit that job after I decided that I wasn't going to break my neck for minimum wage. The only amusing thing about this job was that Pokemon had started to become wildly popular in the United States, and Kmart had these little Pokemon Plus highs, kind of like Beanie Babies, that were just kept on bins in shelves, so of course these things ended up all over the store due to little kids. I did cleaning and store tidying tasks, so I really did have to catch 'em all. Edit, I reread my comment and realized that I have the word death in where I should have had work. I don't know how it happened, but that shit is hilarious, so it's staying in. Worked for Hastings back in 2013 while they were just starting the spiral. The biggest problem at that time that I could see as a lowly front desk supervisor front desk lead was that the system for ordering items was about 20 times slower than just going online to Amazon and ordering it. You'd pay $2 more, but it got to you in 3 days tops. There was probably more, but that was a big piece that stuck out to me back then. I worked at Blockbuster, but I quit a few years before they finally bit the dust. Probably we could tell that they were going under when they started chasing Netflix and copying them rather than trying to find a way to actually do something new. Of course, plenty of employees on Ihate Blockbuster swore they saw it coming for years. Also, when nobody could get a decent manager to stay on, that was a pretty big red light. My owners started printing news articles about Netflix slowing down deliveries to folks who rented too much and posting them on our video store's entrance door. My startup went under, but here were the signs. The only work was busybody work assigned by bosses and not coming in from the queue. We missed payroll 1 week. We asked when we were getting shut down, they said everything was fine. Bosses had locked door meetings for 2 weeks and were cunts to everyone during that time. ROF started 2 months after the first payroll miss. The company is now completely shuttered. My boss was a fucking idiot and had this wild ass plan of selling the company with no product or revenue. We tried pitching alternatives and driving revenue so that the company would succeed, and we were talked down to at every opportunity and told we know nothing about sales or running a successful company. I worked at Quilex, Kodak 1 Hour Photo, Blockbuster, Steve and Barry's, Caribou, while they still exist, it's only just barely, and they've contracted a lot, Saturn, and a few others that no longer exist. Funnily enough, it was never on the downswing while I was there. Mostly, anyway. I should have companies pay me not to work there. I didn't work for one, but I could see Borders bookstore going down when Barnes & Noble came out with the Nook after Amazon had Kindle. Borders missed the boat. It's too bad because I like Borders better than Barnes & Noble. It's not defunct at this time, but I worked for Pier 1 in the 90s and more recently as a holiday job. In the 90s we opened a fair number of credit cards, but in 2018 we were instructed to politely hound people about opening a credit card, which I hated doing. I don't know if they're done for, but it's rough out there in brick and mortar retail. There was much more sense of a solid business in 1998. Genuinely curious as to how EB Games is still around. Worked at Sears Auto Center back when I was in college in 2008. I knew they were done for as soon as I started working there. Writing was on the walls, they were always losing money and stock was always limited. Articles we released year after year how they were top 10 companies to go out of business. I didn't care, it was a steady paycheck for a simple job while I was getting through college. I briefly worked at Kmart after my family moved to a new state. It was readily apparent that higher management was just trying to minimize their expenses until the stores were forced to close so they could have the largest post-bankruptcy payday they could muster. It was sad too because most of our customers would tell us how much they loved us over places like Walmart. If they had decided to invest in Kmart and actually gave a damn, it could have made a comeback and been a decent competitor. I worked at a Radio Shack in college. I knew they were done for before I even applied, I just needed some pocket money for weed and a WoW subscription. Not a store, but a .com. I knew we were doomed when management decided to buy a whole load of expensive IBM servers to host clients' websites, just as the national telcos were starting a hosting price war. Paying for those things, plus running costs, which brought in $0 revenue, was a millstone too big for a 20-person company. We would have been fine if we just continued to deliver award-winning websites and digital media. Not exactly a store, but I worked at a drive-in in high school. When the owner told me I could eat all the candy, hot dogs, and popcorn I wanted, I knew he was going out of business. Circuit City. All the talk is we might be going under. Management says don't worry, it was only the Midwestern stores, New England is fine. Week later I found out on the news, couple hours before my shift started, that I no longer had a job. They let us work another month to liquidate but had no keys to the building and had to be escorted in and out. I worked at a Sears as a temp holiday appliance salesman around the time corporate was closing down its first massive waves of stores. I think the biggest writing on the wall was that they apparently changed their commission structure around the time I got there. Asking the other salesmen who have been there for years, I learned that with the new system, you basically make about 30% less than the compensation system they had prior, which in itself was also less than the last system a year prior. Our orientation included someone from corporate going over how amazing Sears is, and how great it's doing. About a year or so later that store closed. I only really worked there for 2 months. I got a job at Sears. I figured out they were definitely dying because I was getting a whopping 4 hours a week, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Left me plenty of time to find a full-time job, and when I did find a decent job, I just stopped showing up to Sears. My manager called me asking if I really wanted to give up this job, and that I needed to carefully consider my options. I told them that I has weighed my options, and my new job gave me 10 times the hours, and nearly twice the pay.